Hi, today we're going to be talking about my sewing machine, Suzie, and her 100-year story. Suzie is my circa 1920 Treadle sewing machine. I found her on Craigslist from a couple that was trying to sell her because they originally bought her to upcycle the cabinet into just being table legs and take the machine out altogether. And when I was doing research to try to find a Treadle sewing machine, I found that these upcycled tables were more expensive than the Treadle sewing machine tables themselves. I wanted a Treadle sewing machine specifically for my dress recreation process because I wanted to know what that sewing experience would have been like. What I didn't expect was that I would develop a relationship with this machine, that it would turn from a tool into a project partner. Side note, yes, I am gendering and naming my machine. This is a really common practice among sewists today. I see this as a moment to reclaim the value of women's garment labor by having a knowledgeable and skillful working relationship between me and Suzie. We name and gender boats and cars, which is predominantly done by men, and then are rendering these objects female. So I'm taking this as an opportunity to subvert that traditional narrative. Suzie was in really rough shape when I got her. She needed cleaning and oiling and even needed a new belt. So I did my research by, going online and watching YouTube videos and also joining a vintage sewing machine Facebook group. So after consulting the group, I completely took apart the machine and cleaned it. I cleaned the machine and the wood with oil. I tried to remove rust through the chemical reaction of water and citric acid. And then any of the rust that didn't come off, I cleaned it with a steel wool and a steel brush. What was so cool as I was taking the machine apart to fix it was I realized the incredible knowledge and engineering that was needed to put this thing together in the first place. It was just so cool and really profound to be able to touch an object that was held and made and created by so many other hands that had this really intense, embodied knowledge of how this thing works. Moreover than just the people who knew how to make the machine, you also had the original owner and the sewists of Treadle sewing machines who needed that knowledge in order to maintain their machine and fix it in case something broke. To place this concept into context, I want to talk about Suzie as having a life cycle. The life cycle of objects is an idea that is further explained by Karen Donnell. So just like living beings, objects have a birth, a life, a death, and even a rebirth. This theory lets us think about how objects relate to not only different people throughout its lifetime, but also environments. So Suzie is a Lessing sewing machine, which was not very popular. Lessing was a subsidiary or a special type of machine that was made by the King Sewing Machine Company. King Sewing Machine Company was based out of Buffalo, New York, and would have been heavily reliant on Buffalo's mining, iron, logging, and manufacturing industries. So the mining and the iron processing and the logging industries would have been very important to get the raw materials for the object. The iron industry in the northeastern part of the United States participated in something called the American system, which was based on interchangeable parts. So that items like firearms and sewing machines, all of the little bit component parts were not reliant on being made specifically for one unique machine, but were made so that they could be transferred in between machines. This system vastly reduces cost and is able to create items in bulk. Another aspect of the manufacturing process is having manufacturers and factories that are for specific objects. So just for sewing machines, just for firearms, just for stoves. There are so many hands and people and industries that are involved with the sewing machine besides the manufacturer. I have no idea what Suzie's life was like before I bought her. And the people that I bought her from had no idea either. But we can take a closer look at this object itself in order to try to put together what her life might have been like. We know that sewing machines were a very important part of this idealized version of American women's performance of domesticity. Sewing for the household was a practice and a skill that was passed down from mother to daughter, so you would think with the invention of the sewing machine around 1850 that would be a lot easier, right? Yeah, no, it's always more complicated than that. Early sewing machines were really only effective at sewing long seams, as historical construction methods often required a lot of hand sewing. So seamstresses, as in women who were hired to sew seams, not to be confused with dressmakers, were in a bit of a pickle. In contending with this new technology, they would either lose their jobs as seasonal gig economy laborers, or they would be able to afford a machine and be able to, do more and more piecework and actually gain some sort of an income from that. Home sewing with a sewing machine to make fashionable garments wasn't really a thing until around 1870, when there was a viable market for paper patterns. But even then, it was not expected that a woman would make her entire wardrobe. Dressmakers were skilled laborers and artisans who spent years and years studying and perfecting the art of making clothes, as well as having the knowledge of what was most fashionable coming out of Paris and New York. They could not be replaced by a late 19th century sewing machine. But dressmakers were slowly losing authority of making and fashionable trends due to the rise in paper patterns, these widely available magazines, as well as the industrialized garment making industry. This did not happen overnight. We're looking at the invention of the domestic sewing machine around 1850, a viable paper pattern market around 1870, the rise of industrial garment making in 1890, and then this garment workers' strike movement around 1910. This 60-year period moved the expectation of garment production from being a specialist outside the home to the women of the home to not only buy fabric and the pattern and to be able to have the knowledge to create all these kinds of garments, but also buying, less expensive ready-made garments. And she could do all of this because she had the labor-saving device of the sewing machine. Let's talk about that. Labor-saving device for whom? Like, on top of all the other domestic chores women were expected to do, now you're also going to add an increased level of home sewing? That doesn't sound very labor-saving to me. Before we go any further, let's situate ourselves. American women have always sewed at home in one capacity or another, regardless of race or class. And the sewing machine was expensive, so let's be honest about who actually bought it. This was a machine that white middle-class American-born women purchased and made their own. Yes, there were BIPOC home sewists and dressmakers who bought and used these sewing machines. But this narrative of the idealized American woman would never be achievable for these BIPOC women because they weren't white. This ideal was also a fallacy for the intended white middle class audience, because this ideal was based off of upper class standards. The middle class could attempt to reach for it, but they would never be there in totality. In reality, no one wins. So going back to our study object Suzie, the copyright date on her throat plate says August 1920. I found a Sears catalog from 1918 that had a very similar sewing machine, but it was listed all the way at the end of the sewing machine section. Already electric motor attachments for sewing machines around 1910, and by this point, there were electric machines that you plugged into the wall, or in some cases, you plugged into the light socket. Suzie was the kind of machine that was no longer innovative, but still could be used as an affordable option for home sewing. Sears was less than thrilled to promote a similar kind of sewing machine, saying that they do not, quote, urge or recommend the purchase of this machine. So taking everything together, what does this mean? And the answer is anything, really. We have no idea how Suzie started out her life, but we can take a guess based off of what we know about how, in general, these kinds of sewing machines were used. She could have been a practice machine or a machine bought for a servant for a wealthy family. She could have been the saving grace for a lower class family. She also could have been a point of pride for a woman who saved up her money to finally be able to purchase a sewing machine, or a gift from a husband to his wife for their expectant child. My favorite possibility is that maybe this was purchased by a drag queen in pre-World War II New York who was ready to make her first dress for the night out on the town. But we don't know. What I can tell you from studying the object is that the last thread that was used, the thread that was on the bobbin, was a white cotton or silk thread. There is significant water damage to the top and the back of the machine. The wood veneer on the top of the machine is significantly chipping from water damage, and the back wood panel is warped out for the same reason. And when I got her, she was thoroughly filthy. From these observations, my best guess is that she was left in an attic or a basement to the point where it took 3/4 of a bottle of sewing machine oil in order to get her to work again. So now Suzie lives with me, and she's not a symbol of mandatory domesticity. She's more of a class symbol. I don't need 2 sewing machines, but I have 2 sewing machines. I already have an electric sewing machine that can do way more than what a Treadle sewing machine is capable of. Suzie is an extra expense and just takes up space and can be seen as mere tchotchke for a historical costumer, especially since she currently sits in a place that makes her very difficult to work with. And in that current space, she is devoid of any of her original purpose. Kenneth Ames suggests to do a spatial analysis of objects in order to understand how they interact with objects around them, the space around them, and how people move in and out of that space. Suzie currently sits in the corner of my sewing room / spare bedroom and is surrounded by a disorganized mess. She is on the opposite side of the room from any source of natural light, and the artificial light in the room casts shadow all over the workspace. When looking at my electric sewing machine, everything I need is in arm's reach. So my scissors, my thread, my marking pens, everything I need, I can reach. I can't do that with Suzie. If we contrast my setup with this photo of a woman from 1930, we can see a big difference. In this case, the sewing machine is an active part of the house. Behind the woman, we see the corner of a bed and a window with a photo of a man on the sill. To her left is a mirrored vanity that takes up the corner of the room. The vanity is covered in personal items, which include presumably family photos. The vanity serves a multi-purpose function. It is a place of memory through pictures and objects of sentimental value. It is storage for personal items and various bedroom essentials. And the mirror is an interior decorating trick that not only makes the room seem bigger than it actually is, but reflects the light from the window to help illuminate the room even more. The vanity is also acting as a space where this woman performs femininity through doing her hair, makeup, and personal styling. Her sewing machine functions in the same way. The wheels on the bottom of the legs allow the woman to move the table to suit her needs, as a sewing machine or as a flat surface. The drawers in the cabinet store bobbins, thread, buttons, scissors, and personal items like letters, notes, special flowers, or ribbons. It is also a space to perform female domesticity, as the home sewing machine added textile arts to the increasingly growing list of gendered home labor. Taking inspiration from this photo, I intentionally decided to move my sewing machine from the corner and into a functional space. With the help of my mom, I moved Suzie to the first floor where she can function as a sewing machine and as a table. She functions as a decorative and domestic parlor piece, but also is now more effective for me to use her as a sewing machine. I can use the drawers for storage, have easy access to the cutting table, which is either my dining room table or the floor. I have lots of natural and artificial light, and I have space to iron, and plenty of comfy places to sit where I can finish items by hand. Not only is this helpful to me as a sewist, but doing a spatial analysis of the machine in this location can show what this machine means to me. If my home were a historic site, how would you interpret the placement of the machine in a public space? How does this differ from the 1930 photograph? Suzie is in a public transitional space in my house. She is next to the stairs, on the way through the dining room into the kitchen, and right next to my kitchen overflow shelves. To me, I see Suzie fitting into my 1920s working class home. She is pretty and functional. This single family house has beautiful decorative masonry, but is also small enough to do the job of being a house for a family that's going to spend more time at factory work than in the home itself. Suzie can be tucked away when not in use to save the little space that I have. Looking even bigger than the room that my sewing machine fits in, this house in 1920 was just around the corner from both a carpet yarn mill and a shirtwaist factory. She becomes a part of the larger story of the Philadelphia manufacturing legacy in the early 20th century. She's a conversational parlor piece and also a working tool, this symbol of the idea of class mobility that was often incredibly difficult if not impossible to achieve. But on a brighter note, Suzie can help me follow in my family's tradition of professional dressmakers and home sewists, but also to help me tangibly interact with the people who spend thousands of hours on Treadle sewing machines just like this one that helped create the legacy of manufacturing and domestic life in the early 20th century. So what about you? Is there something in your house that has a story to tell? Are there objects in your house that tell more about yourself than you previously thought? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Thanks again for watching and see you soon. Bye! No. She would, no. Sears, on the other hand, the children are fighting.